Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, why kids are struggling and how to help them thrive. I am speaking with a returning guest, Ned Johnson. He's the president and tutor geek of Prep Matters, an educational company specializing in academic tutoring and test prep. A battle-tested veteran of stress regulation and student performance, Ned has spent over 50,000 one-on-one hours helping students tackle everything from test anxiety to motivation and mindset. He's the co-author of The Self-Driven Child, What Do You Say? And The 7 Principles of Raising a Self-Driven Child, which is a workbook that is out now. He also hosts the Self-Driven Child podcast, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, The Guardian, and more. Are your expectations helping or hurting your child? Is your own anxiety fueling theirs? Does your child feel overwhelmed by school stress or the pressure to be perfect? If you're unsure how to support your child without adding to their stress, you're not alone. In this episode, Ned talks about why so many kids are struggling and what you can do to truly help. He shares the PERMA model and why achievement is just one slice of a child's well-being, how to motivate kids without pressure or control, the power of motivational interviewing and asking questions that spark self-awareness, what to do when your high-achieving teen is running on 4 hours of sleep and won't drop that extra AP class, how validating emotions and shifting the energy in your relationship can unlock real change, and so much more. He gives an overview of the 7 principles: put connection first, be a consultant, communicate healthy expectations, and more. This episode is a must listen for any parent, caregiver, or educator ready to move from managing behavior to building real connection. If you've ever wondered how to support your child's mental health while still helping them succeed, this conversation is for you. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, Ned, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk with you, Anna.
Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations on the new workbook.
Thank you.
How do you feel about it now that it's out in the world?
We feel good about it. We never get tired of talking about this stuff. And, part of the idea behind a workbook was simply that we're all homeostatic, right? We all default to our defaults. And so, as a parent or as an educator, you might listen to some great advice from a friend or maybe a podcast like this, or you read a book and say, oh, that's the thing I got to do. And then we typically go home and we go right back to doing the same darn things we did before, even when we really have intentions to change. And so part of this workbook was with reflecting the idea that it usually takes some practice to make something a practice. And it's also kind of in the idea, you obviously do all this work with families, and part of helping parents change their actions or approaches or behaviors or energy is to spend time with them kind of reflecting on what brought them to the policies or practices that they have, kind of where might they be stuck, where do they have unresolved issues from their experiences as children. And so this workbook is a series of reflections and exercises, things that folks can do with them by themselves. Let me try that again. Things that folks can do by themselves or do with their partner or even do with their kid. So it's been fun. It was also interesting we don't have nearly as much science in here or as many stories, and this is really more about how does a reader engage with the book. So it was kind of fun to write this book thinking about it's kind of a two-way conversation between us with our thoughts and the reader with their own thoughts and experiences. So yeah, we've enjoyed it.
It sounds great. You're right. People always tell me, my listeners, we love listening, we love learning, but the moment we stop play, we go into our life and it feels like whatever we learn just disappears, right? And this is why like support groups, coaching calls and courses or workbooks are really supplemental learning. I think a work is important because then when you write down things and you are with yourself, it solidifies your learning and it's always there. You can go back and see how you answered. But what I love about this workbook, you say that there are exercises you can do with your kid and with your partner. So tell us more about this. I think this is really unique.
Well, so there's one that we really like. It's in the chapter, Teaching Your Kids an Accurate Model of Reality. And sort of born out of the idea that so many young people, teens especially, have the idea that the most important outcome of high school and adolescence is where they go to college or university. And when you ask parents, that's important to them, but there's so many other things that come in front of that. And so there's an exercise where we ask parents to kind of rate how important it is for their kids to have prestige, to have power, to have financial success, to be kind, to be fair, to have families of their own, to do work that feels meaningful, to have deep relationships, deep friendships. And then slide that same list over to your kids and ask them, what do you think that I as a parent value for you? And there's typically a bit of a disconnect. And it unintentionally, kids can come away feeling that what their parents care about is school and grades and college and grades and school and college and grades, right? And that's kind of pretty thin gruel. And part of what leads to this kind of chronic levels of stress and, perfectionism for the overachieving and avoidance for the underachieving, because kids feel like, everything about life is how they do in school, and that their parents' approval for them is rooted in their academic success. And when conversations can be about, well, what I really want, kiddo, is for you to figure out, who your friends are in the world, who you're going to spend time with. If you get married, if you have a spouse, who's that person going to be? And it's kind of a little bit of a sneaky way to lean into conversations that are more rooted in values and to sort of course correct if what we have tried as parents to convey to our kids isn't what kids feel like we've conveyed to them. Well, then it's a way to sort of get back on the same page a bit. And so for those values that children and parents can ideally co-create or at least communicate with one another, those can remain kind of North Stars in the same way these 7 principles of the book are North Stars that guide your behaviors. What is it that we're really trying to achieve here? There's also, by the way, in that chapter, a whole exercise, I call it the perma pie, about happiness. And in our second book, What Do You Say?, we did this deep dive, a chapter so the book is called What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids About to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Really enjoyed this book. It kind of dropped during COVID, so it disappeared a bit. But there's a chapter in that called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness. And we lean into, among other things, Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology. And for people who don't know this, he talks about PERMA, so it's positive emotions. And some of that's how you're wired, glass half full, but it's also sleep and gratitude and things we know contribute to positive emotions. Engagement or the flow experience, one where you're working really hard on something and it's high challenge, but it's low threat. And these are often out-of-school activities. Relationships, which is arguably the most, well, not arguably, is the single biggest determinant of people's happiness and satisfaction in life. Meaning, so what feels purposeful to you? I mean, the work that you do this, I mean, it pays your mortgage, I'm sure, but you're animated because on your website, I'm interested in helping parents, right? Because we can't help kids without helping parents. And then achievement is the last part of it. And that's insignificant, but it's only 20% of it. So the exercise in the 7 principles for raising a self-driven child is having people just really pay attention to and thinking about how much do they value those things? How do they portion them? And then how are you spending your time? Are they really aligned with these things? And there's no, again, we live in this achievement culture, and there's not a problem with achievement. It's just that because it's 1/5 the equation, much like, having nice things, there's no problem with being material, enjoying nice things, but material needs don't meet material things don't meet spiritual needs or relational needs or needs for meaning. I'm feeling lonely. Well, Ned, gosh, if you buy a truck, then you'd have all these friends. It's like, well, no, then I'll be a lonely guy with a truck, right? And so if I really want to work on friends, I got to figure out maybe what do I do with that truck, to then give people rides or whatever and connect with folks. So those are a couple of the exercises that, at least in that chapter, on an accurate model of reality.
Yeah, that's great. Expanding the view, right? We're not saying achievement is not important or don't pursue this, but there are other things that you can focus on and consider. I live in this highly competitive town where the school is very rigorous. And
where do you reside?
Well, I'm in Princeton, New Jersey.
Yeah, I've heard of that. There's a community college there, I think, isn't there? Or anyway,
yes.
I'm teasing.
Yeah. And so, kids, even though I don't put pressure on my kid, but she puts a lot of school pressure on herself because of the environment, because of other parents pressure their kids. It's just the environment. Some of these kids are building their resumes since 7th grade, opening nonprofit organizations and things of this nature.
Oh, yeah, no, it's 100%. And to be fair, we see this everywhere that we go. I mean, we've lectured in 27 or 8 states. We've, countries all over the world. The book's published in 20 countries in 19 languages, and it's everywhere that you go. And so you're right that kids can perceive this pressure, even if mom or dad are like, it's all good. And so from our perspective, in some ways, it's what Ibram X. Kendi, it's not enough to not be racist. You got to sort of actively be an anti-racist. And so the same thing here, that it's not enough. Hey, I don't push my kid. She pushes herself. Well, if the degree to which a child is pushing herself seems like, this is a little unbalanced, then we just want to actively work against it, because the soup that they're swimming in, right? Stress is so contagious. And so kids, and particularly teens, they look at what other people are doing. And so if all the quote unquote leaders and the high status folks are all these people who are obsessively driven, they get the message that to be successful, I need to be doing the exact same thing. And most mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to. And so there's no problem if a kid wants to go to Princeton. Hey, you look great in orange and you want to rock that for 4 years. Hey, you do you. But it's when kids feel that they have to in order to have a successful life or a happy life or a meaningful life that we really, really have a problem. So, for example, a lot of parents, maybe listening to your wonderful podcast may have kids who are obsessively perfectionistically driven. And they say, I can't, every time I tell her it doesn't matter that much, she just fights me and tells me, you don't understand, Mom. Of course these grades matter. Of course I need to go to college. Of course. And so some of the advice that we have, this is going back to our second book, is to validate that, but offer and take force off the table, because when you try to tell a kid, hey, it doesn't really matter that much, they don't believe you. And so what you can, and this as a therapist helping folks, is you can just say, my gosh, it must be so stressful to feel like you've got to be perfect all the time because everyone else is running at 1,000 miles an hour. Yikes. That's a lot. And typically the kid is like, oh my God, you have no idea. It's so hard. I mean, you get a 98 and someone else has got a 99 and what we're trying to do is to give kids the opportunity to talk, and spill their guts a little bit. And then you say, well, for what it's worth, I see it. I get how driven you are and I love how hard you work, but I see it a little differently. And if you're interested in my perspective, I'm happy to share. And kids are typically desperate for another way of living that isn't so obsessively driven. And then you can say, something like, well, and then you can share with all these myths, and we talk about in the book that, that valedictorians of the school lead the most successful lives. It's not true. It's not true, largely because valedictorians are generalists. They have to be equally good at everything. And what people who tend to really thrive, Sir Ken Robinson, The Element, they figure out what they're better at than most people and what the world values. And then they go hard in that direction, right? There are a million things. You speak 5 languages fluently. I speak 1.1 language. I've tried really hard in French and I've tried really hard in German, but I can barely put together 16 words in either language. Well, guess what? I'm not. I am not a translator or a professor of German or, Romance languages because, tried hard, found subject difficult. And that's okay. So, so part of the idea of talking with kids about values as well, there's a wonderful research. This is actually around my day job is test prep. So I'm a test prep geek. And there was I think this was out of Hopkins, where they were working with kids who had a lot of anxiety around performance on tests and, STEM with math and physics and this kind of thing, which is most vulnerable to anxiety because working memory is so vital in both of those domains. And so they simply had students write about a core value before they took the test. And it made a standard deviation difference in their performance because, I may be really anxious about bombing this test and I don't love math and I find it hard and I know I need this for a grade. Awesome, sure. But if I feel like my whole identity is my GPA and my math grade, it's doubly hard. Whereas if I spend time reflecting on, and I do this by myself or, with my mom or dad, and reflect on what really matters to me, well, now I'm a social justice person who happens to have a B minus in math, as opposed to I'm a B minus person.
I see. Yeah, I love that. I love that. What are the 7 principles? Let's list them all.
Yeah, good. You're more organized than I, so I appreciate that. The first one, and this very much speaks to your work, with authentic parenting. The first one is just to put connection first. And really everything flows from that. First of all, a close connection that a child has with a parent or another caregiver is the single strongest protective factor against the effect on vulnerable developing young minds and bodies, right? It's more, Princeton is a lovely corner of the world, but it's a little rough when it comes to test prep and scores and academic pressure. A child is better off growing up in a war zone with a highly nurturing parent than living in a beautiful community warring with their parents. The depth of that connection is it's more than the parent's education, more than the parent's wealth, more than the safety of the neighborhood. And I know from your experience growing up, with losing your mom in Armenia, the only way that I don't really fully know your story, I've only read it from your website, but you had to have, in addition to your grandmother, you had to have other nurturing adults who were they weren't trying to get you to study harder. They're just saying, hey, kiddo, are you okay? So I'll list them, and then let's keep derailing things. So put connection first. Out of that is be a consultant, not the boss or the manager. And we start with that connection because you can't help people with problems you don't know about, and they don't share problems if you're not close to them. The third is to communicate healthy expectations rather than toxic or demanding ones. The fourth, as I mentioned a moment ago, is just to help them develop an accurate model of reality. Help them develop an accurate model of reality, because most kids grow up with these delusional ideas of what's required to have a successful, happy life. The next is to motivate your kids without trying to change them, because so often parents tell us all the time, how do I motivate my kid? How do I get him to work harder, be nicer to his sister, take hygiene seriously, clean up his darn room, doggone it? And what they're really saying is, how do I change them? And we don't change people against their will. All it does is bring conflict and resistance and weakens that connection. Prior goal number 1 that I mentioned. Next is to be, as much as we can, a non-anxious presence in the lives of our children and anyone we care about, because stress is so contagious and brains don't work well when they're stressed, and people aren't motivated in a healthy way when they're stressed. But the good news is that calm is also contagious. And then the last one is what we call digital downtime. And it's just that we all live in worlds that are so fast-paced, often made more fast by our connection to our phones and our email and iPads and everything else. And so we're living, IRL in the real world and also this digital world. And our perspective is that because too much stress is really bad on brains, we need to balance high levels of stress. And it's not that stress is inherently bad. It's being stressed all the time is inherently bad. And the antidote to a lot of stress is periods of really no stress. And so our feeling is, whether this is daydreaming or mind wandering or meditation, and we can dig deep on meditation if you want. Bill and I are longtime practitioners of what's called transcendental meditation, which is an opportunity twice a day of experiencing deep, deep calm. And this is really an antidote to the kind of mind-wandering, mind-scattering, stress-inducing, crazy making effects of living lives that are too fast. And then the last chapter, it's not a 7 principle, but kind of the bonus chapter, is about school and supporting autonomy and a healthier sense of control for kids in school, because this is where most kids spend most of their time. And for many kids, school is the major source of their stress, the major source of their suffering. And for many kids, it's tantamount to a toxic environment. And we just don't want kids spending 12 years of their lives in places where it's really injurious to healthy brain development and to healthy mental and to development of good mental health.
Are you looking for personalized support on your parenting journey? I offer one-on-one coaching tailored to your needs, including court-ordered parenting classes and co-parenting counseling. These services are available to anyone, no matter where you live, whether in the United States or abroad. As a special thank you to my listeners, you can enjoy 10% off all coaching packages. Visit authenticparenting.com to learn more about my services and how we can work together to achieve your parenting goals. Which one is your favorite out of all the 7, if you have one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the one that I probably try to model the most, and I do the most work on for the work that I do with my own children and as a person who works with young people, is to be a non-anxious presence. We can talk about that and this chapter about motivate your kids without trying to change them. Because the ways that parents love their kids. And when they're in a hard place or they're not doing as well as they want, we get nervous. And we try to get them to. But it doesn't tend to work very well in ways that should be somewhat predictable, but are certainly scientifically provable. And we, certainly in our second book, What Do You Say? This was the big contribution, I suppose, to What Do You Say, which is it's really based on principles from the self-driven child and then language around how to be the language of a non-anxious presence or the language of a parent consultant. But we do a deep dive on what's called motivational interviewing. Is that something you use in your practice, motivational interviewing?
I don't call motivational interview, but the idea is basically the same thing. Yeah.
So I can, if I may, I'll sort of talk people through this a little bit, and then I'll share the exercise that's in this 7 Principles book. So here's the idea that if you've got a child or spouse or a parent or a friend or a coworker who's in a tough place and they're struggling, you have what's called a righting reflex, and you naturally want to solve it, right? And so your brain goes into overdrive thinking, well, gosh, what if you tried this or that or the other thing, right? That would really make a difference. Or if a person is really kind of beating themselves up in really dark feelings, we try to move them out of those feelings. And, well, my gosh, kiddo, it's just, you'll make other friends. Timmy wasn't the greatest kid ever, right? Or it's only the first test of the semester. You'll have plenty of chances to catch up. I'm sure of it. And this advice is well-intentioned. But if we give this without getting buy-in, it can feel invalidating. Well, gosh, Ned, if you'd only done one of these 3 things that occurred to me, you wouldn't be in this pickle, you dope. That's not what you're saying, but that's what it can feel like to me. Or, it's the first test of the semester. You'll have other chances. It reads a little bit like, dude, get over it, which again feels a little bit invalidating. Particularly important for kids who seem to be locked in hard places. This was actually created by a couple psychologists in the 80s who worked with problem drinkers. And what they found was when I tried to motivate or tell someone why they've got to drink less, you get conflict and resistance. But only every time. And they would fight it. Oh, Anna, sorry, I said Anna or Anna. I should have asked at the beginning.
It's okay, Anna. Yeah.
Anna, thank you. I should know this. You're Armenian, Anna. Anna's probably more like Kansas or something. So Anna, thank you. You'll tell me all the reasons, but I will argue the other side of the equation. Well, Anna, you don't really understand. I've got it under control. It's not that big a deal, or my life is really stressful, and that makes me feel whatever. So the way the motivational interviewing works is you ask open-ended questions. You use reflective listening, and then you wait for change talk. And for people who are like, I don't know about this, the exercise that's in our book is this. You take something where your kid seems to be stuck around friends or personal hygiene or school or whatever, and you write down all the reasons you can think of of why a kid has reasons to change his behavior. But ideally, things that you can think about that he already knows. So we did this with we were doing a presentation, online presentation with folks in Palo Alto, and said, okay, everybody first name A through M. Write down all the reasons you believe that your kid understands of why they should work harder to get better grades, right? And so it was, better grades, getting into college, feel more confident, feel better about themselves, make their parents happy, make their teachers happy, get paid more, whatever. Whole bunch of compelling reasons. But we, at the same time, we had everybody last name N through Z write down all the reasons why kids might not feel like they want to do this. Right? They don't like Mr. Johnson. He's kind of an annoying teacher. They'd rather be playing Xbox. They'd rather be talking to their friends, right? They've got, and their older sister, Anna, is such a rock star. They can never frigging compete with her. So, why would I do that, right? It takes too much time. They'd rather be sleeping. Or things like, and these are the fun ones, right? They don't know that it would make a difference. They worry that they would fail. They could work as hard as they could work, and go from grades that are sucky to sucky plus, and then realize the limits of their own intellectual abilities. Those are strong feelings, even though getting a better salary is a pretty compelling reason, right? And when you go through this exercise, you realize why people can feel stuck. And when we lean one side of the equation, the kids, at least in the head, argue the other side. So this is probably my favorite thing. And if I may tell you a story about a kid I worked with. So this was a kid she's a super academic rock star. She's just now getting every college in the world, blah, blah, blah. And I started working with her, I guess, beginning of her junior year of high school. It's about a year and a half ago now. And super stressed. Somewhere along the line, she shared, you talked about where you are, that folks will start planning their college in 7th grade. This girl said to me, my mom has been planning my college resume since I was 5. So the bad news is the lesson had been received. And the lesson that the girl had received was work all the time, never let up, never take a breath, achieve. And if you don't, something terrible will happen. Okay, so she's taking 6 academic courses at the highest possible level at a really, I'll say, a high-achieving independent school in our area. And it was great. She was getting A's and everything. Looked amazing. The only problem was she was sleeping like 4 hours a night. And it's not sustainable. I mean, she was already anxious. She was becoming depressed. And then kids don't downshift. They collapse. And this was going to be bad because she had a year and 8 months to go. And so the folks at her school could see that this was a problem. I mean, and because, they could see this. And so her academic advisor sat her down and said, listen, you really need to drop one of these classes. This is too much. Let's talk about which class you should drop. And the girl was, I can't. I know I've got to have these classes. And she's bright enough to argue all the reasons why she couldn't possibly let go. So it didn't work with that person. So then the college counselor went at her. And then ultimately 4 people, including the school therapist, said, you got to drop one of these classes. And she was bright enough to say, over my dead body, and anxious enough to not give in, and totally inflexible. So her mom said, can you talk her into dropping one of these? And I said, I don't believe in talking people into things, but I'll talk with her about it. And so I reread the chapter from What Do You Say about motivational interviewing. And I should note, I'm not a psychologist, right? I have good instincts with kids, but I've not been trained in this. But people, if you understand the principles and you can kind of change the energy, it can work in ways that are pretty powerful. So I just started by asking her, so tell me about the class that you're taking. What do you like about this? And what's the coolest thing about comp sci? How'd you even get into this? Then used reflective listening and just repeated stuff back. And as you know better than I, this is the foundational tool of effective therapy, because it's a way that we don't change people's minds with logic. We change it when they feel like we're working really hard to understand their perspective. And so, by the way, if you've got a kid who's like, why are you repeating everything back? Say, I just want to make sure I've got this right. So what I'm hearing is, so I went back and forth with this, and eventually started to pivot of, is there one class you like more than another? Oh, you don't like, what do you not like about English? If you could change something in English, what would you change? And I'm looking for her to come up with her own reasons about things that she doesn't like that much, right? Eventually, I do put my thumb on the scale a little bit, and I said, can I ask you about your sleep? And she said, sure. And so what time do you normally get? I never ask how much sleep. I always depend on what time do you normally go to bed at night? 1:30, 2, 12:30 on a good night. Okay, so if you go to bed at 12:30, you're getting up at what, 7 for school? No, well, it usually takes me about a half an hour to fall asleep because she's so anxious. But I get up at about quarter of 6. So on a good night, 1 to 6 is 5 hours. On a bad night, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. 4. Yeah, that's about right. Wow. How does that feel? Oh, it feels awful all the time. I'm tired all the time. It makes my mom so much more annoying. I just can't even deal with her. That's hard. On those days when you wanted to, you're like, oh my God, I'd pay to sleep more. I said, how much would you pay? $5 million. I'm sorry? $5 million? Oh, if I had it. Well, do you have it? No, I don't. I said, that English class that you really don't like with Mr. Johnson because he's kind of dopey and the books aren't that interesting. Is that worth like $5 million? Oh God, no. 4, 3, not even close. Huh. And she effectively had articulated her own reasons to change these classes. And at the end of the week, she dropped down from 2 classes AP to honor. And I'm happy to report that she got into all the same fancy pants schools. I don't know yet about Princeton. I've got to circle back and see whether she got in, but she got into the places that she wanted to go. And I'm convinced that she did it because she was taking fewer classes, not because she was taking the most advanced, because I really think she would have crashed and burned and she wouldn't have made it. But the idea behind this is that, and granted, it's a lot easier for me to do this with someone else's kid than with my own kid, because, I mean, I love this kid. She's a wonderful human, but I'm not as worried about her as I am with my own daughter or my own son. But it's a really effective chapter. And for so much of this, it starts with changing the energy. And this exercise about articulating the reasons to and the reasons not to, because they kind of put you in the headspace of your kid and you go, wow, I get how hard this is for her because she probably doesn't like being stuck. And it makes it much more likely that we approach our kids in ways with curiosity and empathy rather than hammering the reasons why they need to change.
New to Authentic Parenting Podcast? Welcome to a journey of healing and transformation. Since 2015, we've been pioneering the conversation on trauma-informed parenting and how doing your own healing work can make you a better parent. With over 10 years of content, it can feel overwhelming to know where to begin. That's why I have curated a special playlist just for you. A collection of 10 hand-picked episodes designed to help you get started. Want to understand how trauma impacts your body, brain, nervous system, parenting, and relationships, and how to heal and transform your life? Join world-leading experts like Dr. Gabor Mate, Deb Dana, Dr. Paul Conti, Dr. Dick Schwartz, Thema Bryant, and many more who have shared their wisdom on our show. Start your journey today. Download your free trauma kit now at authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. That's again, authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when they are our kids, it's a lot harder because there's so much at stake for us, our fears, how it reflects on us as parents, our own insecurities, so much goes into that. But I think, it's always good to separate yourself and even say, I mean, if this was someone else's kid, it makes things a lot easier. Or I often feel like parents are stuck to the idea that they are the parent, like they're parenting from the role as opposed to viewing it as a relationship. Do you know what I mean? So when you come from a perspective of the parent, but I'm the parent, I have to, that's my job, it's my role, then you get stuck and it just doesn't work very well. But when you enter into that conversation from a place of, I'm in a relationship with this human being, then sort of like you drop your agenda and you show up with more presence and curiosity and you create sort of a little distance, right? You have respect for them, for their needs, for their ideas. And you're right. Once you get the teen to voice their own reasons and hear themselves and things like that, even if you don't validate 100%, things shift. things shift, it's so interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and in that same, or I'm not sure I'm not sure which chapter it's in. We have a whole list of parental myths. Good parents make sure their kids always get their homework done. Good kids make sure that their kids always are wearing clean clothes. Good parents make sure their kids are respect authority. Good parents make their, on and on, all these myths of what good parents will do, what their kids will look like. And the reality is, if we're honest about it, we can't make kids do anything against their will. I mean, you can pick a 3-year-old says, I'm not getting in the car. And you say, well, now just pick him up and stick him in the car. But I haven't made him get in the car. I have put him in the car. And so we can't make people do things against their will. We could arguably break their will and they'll just go along with anything. But that's, to your point, that's not really where we want to be as parents. And so when you make peace with the fact that you couldn't make your kid do his homework, I mean, you're going to duct tape him to a chair, what are you going to do? Then it couldn't possibly be your responsibility to do things that are important. Then we change the energy, and then you are focusing on, the connection, the relationship. And from my perspective, it's not my obligation to make sure my kid gets his homework done. It is my obligation to offer him help if he wants help. He needs support, and he wants support in getting his homework done. That's my role as a parent. And there's a wonderful research on it. Well, I should say this. We were just given a talk at a school. We gave a talk earlier to the entire high school on the title of the talk was Creating a Life That You Want. And what that looks like and kind of the neuroscience of the PERMA stuff I talked about before. And then later we talked to the parents. And so we asked the kids, what, are there things you would like us to know? And the things we would like us to tell your parents. So at this talk, the last mom I talked with, and she said, yeah, my son said you have to come to this. She said, we live an hour away from the school. I did not want to come to this. And she said, are you going to, and the kid kept saying, are you going to go? Are you going to go? You have to go to this. And I said respectfully, why do you think he was so insistent on your coming? Because all he do is nag. I said, I said, does that work? Is it working well for you? She said, not at all. But she was, the way that all parents are, worried that it's my job as a parent to get my kid to do whatever. Here's something I'd like folks to know. This is great research. It's Jenna Silk and Ron Dahl, I think is his name. This is out of David Yeager's book, 10 to 25. Really good book on how do we motivate teens. So there were two things. One, they had an experiment where they set up something where adults spoke with teens about some medicine that they should take. And in one situation, they said, this is really help. It's really important that you take this. And kind of using the power of my authority and trying to tell kids what to do. And the other one, they just changed the language, subtle change the language to be more respectful. And they said, listen, I want you to know about the benefits of this. That'll make this difference if you decide to do it. So all this kind of intentive language. So I'd really like you to consider taking this because I think it will help in some ways that are meaningful to you. And it's the same information. They got the exact same information, but the energy changed it. And for the group who was spoken to respectfully, twice as many people took the medicine. I should point out the medicine was purposely distasteful. And the kids were not going in. So they were willing to take the unpleasant medicine when they were spoken to respectfully. The brain science on this is this. They put kids in an MRI machine, and they just played a recording of, in this case, mom saying, you really should do. And they watched what part of their brain blew up. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that considers things, that puts things into perspective, decision-making, problem-solving, shut down. The stress parts of the brain, the anger part of the brain, was jacked up, right? The amygdala. And then something called the temporoparietal junction, the part of the brain that allows us to consider other people's perspective, shut down. So as I'm listening to my mom, my parent tell me, well, you really should. I'm getting angry. I'm not listening to their advice. I'm not thinking about how to use this to solve a problem and my ability to hear their perspective. So it's really a big deal. And I want to back up a half step because I feel like I'm giving parents a really hard time. It's not easy being a parent, in part because if your kid has a problem, by definition, you're anxious. If your kid is anxious, it makes you anxious. And I 100% get this. I have an ADHD son who just graduated college, and golly, Mr. Last Minute Kid, breathtaking. and a daughter who is diagnosed at age 18 with autism, incredibly intense in ways that she could be really rigid. And we could set each other's buttons off. It's not easy. But I'll say that these approaches work. And that's all that I want people to know. They work. And if like that parent, if nagging is working for you, keep doing it. My gosh, double up. But chances are it's not working for your kid, and it doesn't feel good for you as a parent as well. So my only interest, your only interest, is to help parents be more effective in the ways that they want to, help and love on their kids. So yeah, some nerdy brain science there for you. The TPJ if you're interested.
Oh, no, it's very nice. I love that. We love that. And just to mention, I mean, for the folks who haven't listened to your previous interviews and your books are fantastic. I mean, I think they're one of the best books on parenting. My top 10, The Self-Driven Child is phenomenal. And the second one which we did the interview during the pandemic, you said that it didn't get a lot of exposure because of the pandemic. It's a fantastic book. It's like it teaches you what to say, right? It's because people always wanna, but how do I say this? How do I articulate this? I think these two books are just life-changing. And I can only imagine, if you do the workbook with it, it will be like a nice complementary, a course. You can do like a whole thing.
Yeah, and I'll say that the first two books they're long. I mean, they're 300 plus pages. And so people are like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do that. And I would say don't feel like you have to plow through them, in one setting or 1 week or 1 month. You can read, look, The Self-Driven Child, every chapter ends with what to do tonight. Right? And you can just go right there. And then you reflect on it. You try this or that thing in your own life and see if it makes a difference. In what you say, every chapter ends with, there's a question where, say, here's a situation for a kid who's, he's got the big final race, then the state championship in cross country, right? But then there's a party he wants to go to. And what do you say in that situation where he says, can I go to the party? And when you really reflect on the fact that both of these things matter, right? The kid wants to go to the party, but he also he's worked really hard for this big race. What do you say in that situation, right? And so you can jump in at any point and just try to make one of these principles your own. In this most recent book, we have all these things that are basically Post-it notes. And you can write that, and that's a picture of a Post-it note. And you can put this on your own mirror. And for, one that pops to mind is, from our perspective, it's more important that a kid realizes that he's responsible for his own life than it is for him to always do better all the time. And that's hard because when a kid isn't doing well, we so worry, we catastrophize, prophesize, and generalize, right? The kid is screwing something up royally at 7th grade. He's going to end up never doing well in school, never doing well in college, and will end up living his life in a van down by a river. Maybe, right? Or it might just be part of his path, and he's much more likely to get on a different path if you realize that his life is really based on what he does, not based on what mom or dad does, because you don't want kids feeling like the source of solving problems or their success in life is about what their parents do, what someone other than them does. Let's not do that.
So and we convey so much anxiety when we do that. Our own anxieties, we will pass it on to them. Right?
We totally do. Well, that's the non-anxious presence, right? And especially because if you've got a kid who's really struggling, and all you're doing is focusing on this thing, thinking everything will be better when he's doing better at this thing. Unintentionally, what we're conveying is the message that because you're not doing well on this thing, it must be the biggest disaster in the world because this is all that we talk about. I have a kid I was working with, actually, he was doing math tutoring with one of my colleagues, and I spent about an hour sort of just coaching mom with principles from The Self-Driven Child. And this kid he's a sweetest boy in the world. He's bright enough, but he's really ADHD. And so he's just having a hard time. And it's important to know that when you're sleep deprived, the symptoms of ADHD are wildly exacerbated. And when you're anxious, they're wildly exacerbated. And this loving mom was spending 5 to 6 hours every Sunday trying to get ahead or catch up or get ahead on the math that this kid was doing in the week. He was in 5th grade. And he had developed a nervous tic. I mean, he was so anxious because he was getting this message that this thing that you really stink at, this must be the most important thing in the world because this is all that we talk about. We have it 2 to 3 times a week. Mom is spending 6 hours every Sunday, and there was no space for anything else. And here's what's important for people to know. All those executive functions that are wobbly in an ADHD boy, they are wobbly. They are made much more wobbly by anxiety. And so it was just a disaster. And so I just talked with Mom and talked about how do we change the energy? How do you be a consultant, as we describe? And rather than chasing around and trying to get him to do his homework, right, you kind of play this consultant role and we offer him all the support and help that he currently wants. And it changed the energy. I saw them in the next year. They're still doing work with my colleague. And he's just, he'd lost the tick. He smiles widely. He's still not killing math because he's not. And that's just, and it's the brain that he's got. And it's important because the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And so when we put all this energy and we make everybody feel stressed about it, the kid will typically avoid the problem. There's a there's a story in one of our books. This is a wonderful therapeutic technique. I was working with this girl. She was in 9th grade, and she was delightful. I mean, I loved her. Cute as a button, sharp, funny, but also ADHD and also anxious and also depressed. So that's not good. And she was really doing nothing that her loving parents wanted her to be doing, really not engaging in school or, things that they thought were meaningful, and frankly engaged in everything that they didn't want her to be. So she's in 9th grade, she's drinking, she's involved in boys in ways that are hair-raising. I mean, not good, right? So I am third organizational tutor that they've hired. And by organizational tutor, they really meant she no longer listens to us. Can someone else yell at her and get her to do this stuff? And that's not how I roll. So Bill had taught me this technique where I asked her, if you don't hand something in or it doesn't go well or you're doing poorly in a class, who's most upset? And as you know better than I, she said, of course, my mom. So here's the therapeutic technique. So after your mom, who's most upset? My dad. Okay. After your mom and after your dad, if it doesn't go well, then who's most upset? My teacher. Yeah, pretty sure my teacher. Okay. After them. Okay. So after your mom and dad and teacher and the therapist and the tutor, then who's most upset? My little brother, he's sick of all the fighting. The dog, runs and hides in the closet. I said, and where are you on that list? Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not on that list. That's not my list. I am not on this list. And she had this, because everybody else was putting so much energy into it. She's like, nope, I don't have to. And it doesn't change until the energy changes. And so these parents, they love, she's a lovely human being, but it was not going to turn around until she wanted to turn around. And she was not going to want to turn around. They'd taken her phone, they'd taken her friends, they'd taken away. There was nothing else to take away. And that hadn't done it. And it changed when they changed the energy. And I'm happy to say she just got into college that she's really excited for, and she's straightened a lot of stuff out. Life is still not easy for her. This is not an easy brain that she has. But she's a delightful human being, and she's going to college and really is running her life like, like it's her life. Crazy idea.
I know. I love that idea. When everybody else is working hard, the child sort of doesn't want to do any work, participate in their own life. So that's a crucial one. About taking the phone, I just recalled a recent incident. I've known this family for a long time. They come to me from time to time. Recently, they said, oh, there's an emergency. We want to schedule a session. And then they're both on the call and they're describing what the child did, something dumb in school. He got in trouble. The school did suspension. And they're like, but we as parents want to know how can we punish him? How can we make him understand what he did was wrong and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, but that I don't endorse punishment. My approach. Why do you? Then the father goes, all I want to know one thing, Anna, shall I take his phone or not? Just tell me yes or no, yes or no. I'm like, is that what you care about? Take his phone? That's going to solve the problem.
It's so contrary to, Jane Nelson, but I think you and I would both say if the behavior was around the phone, if he texted something inappropriate or
yes, it wasn't in this case, it's like you can take the phone as much as you want, even for a whole year. Nothing is going to change.
Do you know Sarah Rosensweet? Do you know that name? So she's a peaceful
Sarah?
parenting person out of Toronto, Canada, and she's really, really lovely. And she shared this with me, and I'd never heard it explained just this way. But she made this point, and I would offer to this, loving but stressed out dad whom you mentioned, if he's listening. And it was this, that if you want your child to learn from a natural consequence, and it's important to know, this boy already knows that he already knows he made a mistake. He already does, right? Because the school came down on him. He's got his punishment there. So he already knows it. If we really want children, or any of us, to learn from natural consequences, emotionally, we have to take their side. Because if we start piling on, like, I can't believe them, this is unacceptable and irresponsible and blah, 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 they will almost always find a way to disengage from us and to twist it and make it somehow someone else's fault other than their own, right? And they even, well, you didn't remind me, or Dad, you should have, whatever. And what you'd want to do in that situation is, oh man, kiddo, today was kind of disaster, huh? Sounds like you're really in some trouble. You want to tell me about it? And he's like, they did such and such. Oh man, it must be really hard to be in such hot water. And you don't have to agree with what he did or didn't do, but you can agree with the feelings. It must be really hard to be in so much trouble and have the principal mad at you and your teacher looking at like you don't trust you and your friends giving you a hard time, whatever. And that's when kids are more likely to be close to us, because that first chapter about close connection, we get closer to people when we share hard feelings. And if we come down on that kid like a ton of bricks, he's going to share his hard feelings someplace else, or he's just going to swallow them. And we miss this opportunity to connect. And it's through that, as you know better than I, through that connection that we then can say, so can you tell me what led you to making this choice? Because I suspect that in hindsight, you're thinking, maybe I should have done that differently. And then with changing the energy, you then can step into this consulting mode. So if you were tempted again to do that, is there something that you could tell yourself? Or is there one of your friends who could help you? Or is there a way that mom or dad and I can help you? Because my guess is you don't want to be suspended right now. This isn't who you are. You're a really good kid. This was not a really good decision, but you're a really good kid. And so you lean into your connection and validate their feelings and their identity. And then you're so much more well-positioned to say, and next time, let's try this instead. Yeah. I mean, there's a story in What Do You Say? One of the last chapters is talking with kids about expectations. And there was a boy at a school. Bill was seeing this kid, and he's one of the most learning disabled kids at a school for kids for learning disabilities. So it's got a hard brain to navigate life with. And he was, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade or something, and he's at school, and his friends are razzing him about how his jeans aren't cool, and just like a whole bunch of them piling on. And I mean, it's just incredibly stressful. And he ends up, flinging at some kid a racial epithet. Yikes. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. But he was so stressed out, so under attack, so dysregulated. He went for the biggest word that he could use to tell people, back the heck off. So obviously the school had thoughts about this. And the parents reached out to Bill, who's a clinical neuropsychologist, to say, how do we make him understand? How do we punish him to say that this is not acceptable? He can't ever do this again. And Bill said, respectfully, I suspect that he already feels terrible about this. He knows those are not words that you use. Chances are these kids are his friends, but he didn't feel like they were friends in that moment. He felt like they were enemies. They were attacking him. And if he had... Look, he's a kid with profound language-based learning disabilities. If he had more effective words, he would have used them, but he didn't, and he pulled out a knife because he didn't know what else to do. And so I would go at him with just the kind of thing I was describing, so that he can learn from it. Because what we tend to want to do when we think about disciplining kids, most people want to say, how do I make them suffer? How do I punish them for it? Where the way back etymological root of discipline is to teach. And we can't help people teach if we're putting them under our thumb, or coming down on them, we're taking their phone, because we've got that emotional disconnection. And as I mentioned before, the prefrontal cortex and the temporal parietal joint gone. So so be empathetic, try to understand their perspective, and then you can say, so we're pretty concerned about this. We understand where you are, but we kind of feel like there should be some kind of ramification for this. Is there something that you feel is kind of a fair and balanced, consequence for what you did? And the kids like to say, well, maybe I shouldn't, go to that thing, or maybe I should give up my Xbox for 2 weeks or whatever. And so, well, does that feel fair to you? Because again, you're emotionally taking their side. Does that feel fair to you? Yeah, it does feel fair. Because now what you're doing is working with a way for them to repair, right? They're willingly saying, here's what I'm going to give up. Here's what I'm going to give up to repair the relationship and me in your good standing, right? But we don't often do that. We take away their phone, that's it.
I love that expression, taking their emotional side. I think that's a good reminder if people can take note of that and just don't work against your children, work with them. I think that's the main thing. Don't be their enemy and like nag them, control them, force them. When you're in that zone and nothing works, you're going to get only more resistance. I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to plug another podcast episode that I did, which really weaves very well with this conversation. It's on validation. We did an entire episode, how to validate someone, their feelings, their behavior, their everything. It's a fantastic episode. I can't remember the exact title, but it's one of the recent ones, and I'll put it in the show notes for the listener. May I just ask about your daughter who was diagnosed late?
Sure.
How did that change her life, your life, the perspective, and what did that give you?
Yeah. So I'll make a plug, by the way, for a book called Is It Autism? It's Dr. Donna Henderson. She is a fantastic human being and a brilliant clinician. And her book is about the subtle presentation of autism in girls and women, because we kind of have a stereotype of what an autistic person looks like. And it's almost always male and almost always with some apparent either cognitive or emotional or relational difficulties. And so we can sort of read, we think of, the Big Bang Theory, whatever. It's like, you can sort of sense. And what her research and other folks have shown is that girls and women typically don't have those impairments, and they're bright enough usually that they can mask. And so while they have social difficulties, oftentimes they don't know that they're autistic, and people around them don't either. And so for us as a family, it was so powerful. I remember meeting with Donna as our family and kind of doing the debrief. And she looked at Katie, how are you feeling? And my daughter is floating about 8 inches off the chair because it was exculpatory. There was a reason for why the things that were hard for her were hard. And she still has to work hard, and navigate in a neurotypical world with a neurodivergent brain, neurospicy, as they say on TikTok, right? But it gave an explanation. And so she didn't feel bad about it. She still has to struggle with it. She works hard. It also helped us understand this idea of autistic burnout, where things that are intuitively or emotionally intuitive for me are not emotionally intuitive for her. She's bright enough. She figures out the same things, but it's a lot more work for her. And so she would need this downtime just to recover from, frankly, real life with neurotypical people. And when I understood that and she understood that, neither of us then felt guilty. Because when I would see her, like she had a day, I'd always want to kind of love her. Hey, let's play a game. Let's make cookies or whatever. And she'd just like, no, I just want to. And she would feel bad for rebuffing me. And I would feel bad having been rebuffed. And like, did I say it wrong? And it's just that what I would have wanted or needed in that situation was not what she needed or wanted. And when I did this, it just profoundly changed the energy for us. So I'm a huge fan of it. And I'll say that, since you mentioned the validation, she just turned 21 this past week, second year of college, doing great. Many things are still hard. And on her 21st birthday, she works in an escape room, and she was working there on her birthday. And a group of 10 or 12 people came in celebrating this other girl's birthday and all this da-da-da-da. And the juxtaposition with her was hard because she said she has this one really great friend at school, and he's just a terrific human, and they just pal around together doing everything. And people don't need a lot of good friends. They just need to not have no friends, right? And he's just a terrific kid. But then she got one text from a friend from high school, but everybody else was family. And so she was looking at this, belle of the ball with 12 kids and comparing to her too. And she's just like, ugh. And so we called her up, wishing her happy birthday, again at night. And she's grousing about this. And in my head, I want to say something like, well, kiddo, with all due respect, you don't have that many friends because you don't like that many people. You're pretty picky when it comes to people. But the good news is the ones that you chose are really salt of the earth. And the friends that you have are amazing human beings. But that, while all true, was not what she wanted to hear in that moment. So I mustered my validation skill and I just said, must be hard. Here you are turning 21 and only a few people reach out to you. I get that feels kind of sucky. And she said, yeah, da-da-da. But within 3 minutes, she had shifted her perspective. where if I had tried to shift her perspective for her, she would have fought me and then hung up on me because I've done this before. I tried to shift her thinking and she just hung up on me. And people don't like to be invalidated. And so the key with validation, just to remind people, is you don't have to agree with their facts. You just have to say something like, gosh, it must be pretty hard to be wishing you got more calls on your birthday than you did. And it's your birthday. That's hard.
Yeah, it's just a feeling, right? She has a feeling she wants to share. Like, why do we want to change or convince her out of it just so that we can feel good in the moment, like we did something as a parent, or why is my kid feeling this way?
And you don't want them to have that hard feeling. That's the whole thing is, I didn't want her to have this hard feeling. It was hard for me to sit with her, watching her be cranky and upset. And so my
that's
natural
the
inclination,
problem,
right?
I think.
It's my own distress.
Yeah.
And I love my daughter. I don't want her to be unhappy. And the natural tendency is to think, if I can shift her thinking, and it's just not intuitive. So I have to work at this every single day. I just had a text thing with someone. I was back and forth, and I was super frustrated by this person, and kind of fighting. And I just texted later. I said, it must be really hard to feel like you're trying to juggle all these things, and it's hard to land the plane. From my perspective, the blame is squarely on this other person's shoulders, right? But it doesn't change the fact that for them, it is really stressful. And I had to remind myself to circle back, and I can validate their perspective even if I think they've made their own mess.
Yes, I agree. And they don't have to be happy all the time. That's not a message we want to convey. That's going to set up again, like for unhappiness deeply, because that's an unattainable goal we are saying, we're conveying, and that's not realistic,
That is an excellent point. It's okay that you're unhappy for now.
Yeah, it's fine. And I am here to listen to that. It's hard for all of us, It is.
We're
hard.
human.
Thank you so much. I truly value your contribution to this parenting world and your presence here today. I really enjoyed listening to you. I can listen forever. You have great stories, and you tell, that's in a fun, humorous way. It's very nice.
Well, thank you. As you know, I can talk forever, so I'm always appreciate the opportunity to come back and chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. And I can't believe your kids are in college. I remember seeing your TikTok videos and things like that they were a lot younger.
It is something else, and I'll leave folks with this. A red friend of mine wrote a book and shared this statistic, and I didn't know this, that on average, by the time kids leave the household at the end of high school, if they leave at the end of high school, they will have spent with us 90% of all the time they'll ever spend with us.
Yeah.
Which is like, wow.
Yeah.
But what really, from my perspective, the quality and the quantity of time they're going to choose to spend with you thereafter is really rooted in how are you communicating with them now? What kind of relationship do you have with them now? And so even when my kids were in your early teens, I was really trying to think, how do I talk with them respectfully? Because I'm trying to really set up, over time, an adult relationship with them, because they're growing into adults. And it's so much more effective. But you're right. I mean, my kid's 23, graduated college. My daughter's 21. And I am so grateful for the relationships that I have with them. And I'm really convinced that it was because my wife and I really walked the walk and really did our best to apply the principles that we have in these books. Because like all of your parents, we love our kids and we want to be effective in how we communicate with them.
Amen. Thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you.
This was great.
Super.
Wow.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group, or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.